village of Bandawaya, which is to the west of Al-Qush in the Nineveh plain. And Sheru Maliktha is significant because it refers to the wife of the Assyrian deity Ashur. Sheru Maliktha means the queen Sherwa. And again, here you can see the famous site of Khinis, which is also in northern Iraq, with carvings dating to the 7th or 8th centuries BC, and they are pockmarked by a series of hermitages or caves in which monks lived, because this was later used as a monastery. Now this again exhibits a high level of cultural and geographical continuity in a similar way to that in which the Acropolis in Athens had been converted to a cathedral during the Middle Ages. So, to my conclusions. The Assyrians' right to their identity is often contested by many scholars who scoff at the faintest notion of continuity. However, we have seen that the name Assyria survived as a geographical term after the fall of Nineveh in 612 BC, continuing for a total period of at least, if not more than, 1,700 years. Assyrian motifs and stories have formed an integral part of Syriac religious and historical literature, and the Aramaic language used by the Assyrian Empire has survived today in this same geographical area from the 8th century BC and until today. Today's spoken language shows more Akkadian influences than any other Aramaic dialect. Variations of the name Assyrian have continued to be used as ethnic and linguistic markers by the speakers of this language as well as their neighbors, and many modern Assyrian settlements continue to bear Akkadian names and are built beside ancient Assyrian archaeological remains, demonstrating this continuity physically. Therefore, the modern Assyrians and their communities in northern Mesopotamia are significant as part of living history that must be maintained and preserved, both in the homeland as well as in the diaspora. Now, the Assyrians have existed as a stateless ethnic group for over 2,600 years since the fall of their empire. Their survival without a state apparatus to maintain their identity, whether a coincidence or not, is something which the world needs to recognize and fully appreciate. This demonstrates that they are a resilient people with a will to survive, and their current struggle as they are faced with a number of existential threats is one of existence or non-existence. Above all, the Assyrians are significant as part of the Middle East's ethnic and social fabric. And we see that since 2003, with the violence that's been occurring in Iraq and the resurgence of Islamic extremism in the form of ISIS or Daesh 2 or 3 years ago, that the Assyrians are now more threatened than ever. And with the destruction of their churches, with the destruction of their manuscripts, with the destruction of their ancient sites, both in Iraq and in Syria, and the kidnapping and murder of Assyrians by these extremists, we see an even larger than before migration of Assyrians to the diaspora. Now, their culture needs to be maintained and preserved, as well as their language, and this needs to be done through scholarship, as well as the implementation of concrete cultural and other projects at the grassroots level. Despite the numerous adversities and odds stacked against them, both in their Middle Eastern homeland and the diaspora, I'm very positive, though, that the Assyrians will find a new way through which they can continue and survive as a distinct group with their own ethnic identity and preserve their heritage as they already have for hopefully another 2,600 years. With a history as long and as rich as theirs, why would the Assyrians not do so? Thank you very much. I think if there's anybody with a question. Okay, I guess James is the first. Yes, go ahead.
You mentioned maintaining the language and the culture in the diaspora, but I didn't just in your last remarks, you didn't mention anything about a political state. geopolitical state, like a province or a country.
Okay, I'm not Ban Ki-moon. I mean, I can't create a state for people. I mean, that needs to be done, on the ground. And it's not like a lecture at UCLA is going to influence.
I didn't say that, but you didn't mention it as being an important. You didn't mention it as being an important part of the effort. But you didn't mention it, so that's all I mentioned.
No. But look, the Assyrians have existed for 2,600 years without a state. I'm sure that they can survive another few hundred years, if not 2,600 more, without a state. So, a state, however, is important because the state guarantees the group's survival. But I don't have a crystal ball, and I'm not a politician. I can't tell you what's going to happen in the Middle East in the next 100 years, if not the next 10 years. But, do you have a question?
I guess what I was asking is if you consider it an important, I'm sorry, I haven't lost my words. I'm in a different time zone, so I'm having some jet lag here. But that you didn't mention it as being an important part of the overall effort to preserve the language and the culture is establishing a province or a state.
Look, there have been Assyrian efforts to create a state or to ask for foreign powers to create a state for them, which has actually been the case through their own lobbying efforts, whether it be at the Paris Peace Conference in 1919, whether it be at Lausanne in 1923, to the various efforts that have turned up here and there in the last 100 years or so. But nothing has eventuated from that. Now, I am one advocate of the fact that Assyrians do need a self-governing enclave somewhere in the world, maybe not in the Middle East. It doesn't have to be in the Middle East, it can be anywhere in the world, where they can maintain their language and history. That would be fantastic. But that's for the Assyrians to work on as a people. And recently there have been some efforts aimed at Assyrian global governance within their own communities so that they can work towards that goal internally. And I think that's not something that I would have dealt with in this lecture. It wasn't something really that came across as part of the current lecture topic. Ramon.
Dr. Al-Jeloo, I want to thank you for a very insightful lecture. Now, as far as, it's something I think is very insightful for a lot of us, even our own community, because of the lack of knowledge, because between what happened in the fall of the empire throughout, even up until the 18th century. My question is, given the relative dearth of academic research and on the topics, what can be done? Because you've obviously done a lot, but I'm sure there's a lot more. So what can we do to kind of expand on that? Because the key to this knowledge is power. So this is as far as not knowing who we are. And I think a lot of us, we have to create that step to kind of expand on that knowledge. So what can we do as far as the community in general to kind of solve that dearth, to kind of eliminate that dearth, because it is there. And you've done a great job as trying to fill it, to kind of take us out of that, but there's still work to be done, obviously.
Well, I'm just going to touch on 3 points. Okay, so the first point is the fact that there's a dearth of information, and that comes from lacunae within the scholarship. And unfortunately, scholarship so far has proceeded with blinkers. Okay, unfortunately, being interdisciplinary and looking at something from various other disciplines, the perspective of various other disciplines, is something that has been frowned upon. You could not, for example, be in Assyriology and also tamper with Syriac studies, or be in Syriac studies and tamper, for example, with Islamic studies or with modern history. They have become these self-contained or self-enclosed fields where the professors or the scholars have blinkers on and don't want to look at anything around them. And I think that's the first problem. Because when you look at history, history is affected by geography, history is affected by language, history is affected by religion, it's affected by multiple things. And one historical stage leads to another, and one culture lives next to another and shares with its neighbors. So there is no such thing as, looking at things from a relative perspective, unfortunately. And this is what I try to do with my talk. Now, if the Assyrians want to invest in their history, this is very important for them to do as a community. Okay, the Assyrians need to realize that they have a responsibility to maintain their collective memory as a people. And whether this is done by supporting scholarships in Assyrian studies or having a lectureship in Assyrian studies at a university, or building a research collection with books and articles and the like relating to Assyrian history at universities, or creating scholarly institutions, that's 100% up to the Assyrian community to do. Because no one's going to come to the Assyrian community and say, hey, you guys have an amazing history, we're going to do this for you. So this needs to come from them. In terms of the identity, it's something that, to me growing up, because I'm an Assyrian, so to me growing up, it was quite simple. Geographically, these people come from northern Mesopotamia. Northern Mesopotamia, before there were Kurds, before there were Turks, before there were Persians, before there were Arabs, was Assyria. And it was nothing else. It wasn't Chaldea, it wasn't Aram, it wasn't Babylonia. The areas where my ancestors came from in northern Mesopotamia, before all these other cultures came, was called Assyria. So, A, there's the geographical aspect. B, there's the linguistic aspect. My language is Aramaic, Northeastern Neo-Aramaic, which refers to that geographical area of Assyria again. And it's also an Aramaic that is infused with Akkadian loanwords. It is also an Aramaic, it is also a language that was instituted as the second official language of the Assyrian Empire in the 8th century BC. So then you have that other link with the Assyrians. And then you have the fact that growing up, I called myself Suraya and I called my language Surat. And I was always trying to figure out what that meant. And for my parents it was easy. I mean, as a 5-year-old, I'd ask my parents, okay, what am I? Well, you're Suraya. What's the language? Surat. All right, when I go to school, what do I tell my classmates? Just tell them Assyria. And what if they don't know what it is? That's their problem. So Suraya and Surat also come from Assyria. They've developed from the name Assyria. I don't know why people would have such a problem with their identity, or such a crisis in trying to figure out what their identity is. I remember having lunch with the Patriarch of the Chaldean Catholic Church last April in Istanbul, and he told me, there needs to be a conference, and we need to bring all these scholars together to come and talk about history and to say, which name is right for our people, so it can be chosen that way. That's not necessary. You don't need to go through all of that waste of time and waste of effort and energy and spending money, because the proof is in the pudding. If people don't see it, I think really it's essentially their problem. And the people that know that they're Assyrians need to work together to do something, rather than wait around for other people to come and join them. Ilrama.
Nick, so there was a lecture at the Library of Congress, which one of the professors specifically brought up the Epic of Gilgamesh and its retelling over time throughout, prior to follow the Assyrian Empire and after, to show the continuity. Are you aware of any other such stories and kind of Assyrian-based stories that show that same continuation?
It's very interesting, because I know in Assyrian folk culture there is the figure of Qatine Jabbara, or the great Qatine, who was a superhero, some kind of a superhero. And I mean, I haven't
Enuma Elish?
Sorry?
Enuma Elish is another epic story.
Yes,
of creation.
but he's specifically talking about Gilgamesh. Enuma Elish is the creation story. And I think that